Just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Vyzygoth's Grassy Knoll continues.
Yeah, we're back, and we have Andy Colvin with us. And Andy, let me just check. You are, in fact, on that line, are you not?
Mm-hmm.
This is good news. And what we're going to talk about, we didn't promote the show with him being on the second hour. We didn't know this was all going to happen necessarily. But here he is, and a couple of things led to this, wanting to talk to Andy, and that is what's taking place tomorrow, May 1st, in Seattle. Interestingly, on May 1st, the high occult day, the true day of spring, and, of course, what happens tonight into tomorrow, which is Walpurgisnacht. So, tell me, are you or any of the citizenry in Seattle, and that would also include Joy Ray Freeman, who lives not far from you, and huh?
Is that the Freeman guy?
No. No, this is Joy Ray well, a little different than Freeman down in Texas. But she lives actually in, not too many blocks away from you, but she's also somebody who sent me the information on the terror drills, and we talked about, the source of this, and she showed some exchanges. I think what happens is that, with everybody now being aware of, London doing its thing on 7/7, terror drill, and something occurs. And then, of course, 9/11, after the fact, they released the stories, which I'm sure they didn't want to, that, oh, by the way, we were having at least 2 drills going on that day, and that's what honked everything up, and that's why no fighter jets went to intercept, 757's gone mad. But you sent something back to me with regard to a bit of a, I guess, premonition, or just a little wink from beyond, and I'm not going to say anything further. Do you want to talk about that, what you emailed me?
Sure.
Shoot, go ahead.
First of all, though, they had I think there were 4 drills on 911, not just 2. There's as many as 4, maybe 5. But they also had some drills. They had the top-off drill that we talked about a few months ago.
Okay.
Remember that? And then it turned out that there were some explosives, alarms set off there at the DoubleTree where Chertoff was staying. And there's been some speculation that somebody was going after Chertoff. Who knows? But definitely, we've got this thing going on in Seattle with the viaduct. The aim of the test is to, they have to come up with a scenario for these drills.
Yeah, right. Something happened. Yeah.
Yeah, the scenario, one of them is that the viaduct, which is an old concrete double-decker roadway that runs along the front of Seattle, right along the water, and it's something that the developers want to get rid of so that they can build condos because it's prime land with the views of the water and the Olympics. But it's loved by the citizens because you get to drive along the coast right downtown and see these beautiful views, both on the one side of the water and the other side the buildings, which Seattle does have some amazing architecture. So once those are gone, the average citizen is going to have no way to cruise through downtown in 2 minutes. I mean, it's such a great road to use, and I use it all the time, and a lot of people do. Once that's gone, we've all lost something. Developers have gained something. So there's always, Seattle is probably, it's one of the most corrupt towns known, and, there's been books written about it, like On the Take, the famous book about Seattle corruption. So they're always finagling things. Every time they're about to tear down a stadium, they do $1 million of work, $100 million of work on it. That happened with the Kingdome and the Key Arena where the Sonics are now moving out.
Mm-hmm.
So even, and they know these things are going to happen. They knew they were going to tear down the Kingdome using the same company that cleaned up the 911 site and Oklahoma City sites.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the same company. Controlled demolition. So,
What was it called?
Controlled demolition.
That's it. Yeah, I think their home base is out of Maryland. Okay.
So, somebody had to plant all of those charges in the towers. I mean, there were hundreds. I mean, can you imagine? And they're still lying about, there was just the History Channel had one the other day called The Rise and Fall of an American Icon, the World Trade, filled with garbage. They just pass over this idea that cleanup crews had to be on the lookout for burning molten steel, as they were cleaning up for weeks. And they blame it on, jet fuel. Anyway.
By the way, I wouldn't finger, and I'm saying this for myself, I wouldn't finger Controlled Demolition for being the ones who laid in the explosives, but certainly they're the company that is always called to clean up these very large crime scenes. And you're right, they were used in Oklahoma City, they were used in New York City, and you're saying they're going to be out there in Seattle.
Well, they were used in the Kingdom.
They were. I'm sorry. Okay, that's it. Right.
And so, they're probably going to be the ones that would implode the viaduct. And there are definitely people that want that thing to come down. And the people with money want it to come down. So, that's going to happen at some point. Whether it comes down in an earthquake or some other scenario, who knows. But I've speculated about that one for a long time. And one thing I've speculated about in my reality series, The Mothman's Photographer, is that when you look at the vision that my friend Tommy got in 1967 of 911, which I got a brief glimpse of, the visions, and I've also had a near-death experience too, where I was almost killed by a rock slide, and I dove out of the way within 1 second of it happening. And my life started flashing before my eyes. And it comes so fast, the visions come so fast, the images, that it's easy to get them mixed up, confused. You lose most of them. You may retain a couple of them. And that's what happened when I had this experience in 1967. I saw a bunch of stuff, just rapid fire. I remembered the 911 thing, or something that looked like it. And then I also remembered something with a domed building that was blowing up. Now, it could have been, there is a domed building at the World Trade Center site, but it didn't blow up. But I saw one blow up. And every time I drive on the viaduct in Seattle and I look over to the city, there's that dome. There's a dome that looks just like the one in New York. And I often wonder, am I ever going to see that thing blow up, or is it ever going to get blown up? And then during the filming in 2004 of the reality series, my camera guy had to go, we were down, parked under the viaduct, and he ran in to get something, and I looked up the viaduct, and I was thinking, man, if that thing fell, would it fall? We were parked like right out from under the bottom of it. I was like, I wonder if that thing fell, if it would fall on me. And just then I looked, and a train was going by, and graffitied on the train it said, Andy, get out from under there. And I took a picture of it with the camera, so it's in the series. I'm not making this up. Such a coincidence that it just blew me away. And it kind of reminded me of that experience with the rock slide, because my Buddhist teacher was with me, and he's the one that kind of grabbed me, and we both jumped out of the way at the same time. And I often wondered if that was an echo of that event. Because once you get into this area, you just don't know where stuff's coming from. Is it coming from the past, from the future? Because there's that ripple effect, like a raw stone dropping in the water, and it sends out circular, vibes in every direction. And then different witnesses, Mothman witnesses and so forth, UFO witnesses, will pick up on this stuff later. So that's my story. I've often wondered if there is going to be something like that in Seattle. There's some little slight coincidental stuff pointing toward it. And I'm certainly not going to say that that's going to happen tomorrow. But in case it does, I will have said it,
Well, what's happened is because of what took place with 9/11 and those avowals about exercises. And all of a sudden London, the same thing. And Jim, who's out there in Illinois and is running this thing, sent me something from Fenton Dunn, who got all over Alex Jones for misrepresenting what took place out there. And for the specifics, I would say, yeah, he wasn't correct. But it was a whole idea, though I took it. I wouldn't be so convicting of him, that, you have these terrorist drills, and all of a sudden, well, what do you know? Something really did happen that day. When you're dealing with 7/7, what was that, 04 or something? I can't remember now. And
Giuliani was there for that.
Yeah. Now, you see, that makes it a whole lot richer. Yes, you're absolutely right. That he was out there, it's okay. Now it's really getting interesting. And so, like I said, I think Dunn might be hammering, in this case Jones, too hard for maybe getting some facts or numbers incorrect or whatever. But it's just like, why does this always happen? But I think by this time now, to do that is too obvious, and that will not take place in Seattle. In fact, I got to tell you, one of the sources for this apparently, and I had responded to Joy Ray about this, was that it comes from our Captain May, who I think is an absolute dingbat. And so it's like, go away. I mean, that's just not an accurate source of information. So, it's one of these things where they can say, well, since I warned everybody, nothing happened. Yeah, okay. I don't know that they're going to use that same modus operandi anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, and also we take a look at that whole situation that we've forgotten about with the Minnesota bridge collapse, the Minneapolis bridge collapse, and and what was going on there. Now, there wasn't a drill there, and I don't know, maybe it just happened. The one thing that struck me, and you emailed me before I could even email you, and that was like, isn't it interesting that there were workers on the bridge before this happened, very much reminiscent of the bridge in Ohio that went down during that Christmas shopping season, the Point Pleasant Bridge. And that's what I thought. But before I could even email you, you sent it to me. It's like, there always seems to be somebody doing something on these bridges before it happens. And
isn't it interesting that we just had a big NAFTA summit last week with Bush in attendance in New Orleans, and we heard that it was happening, but I never really heard what
went on. Yeah.
What went on. But one would guess that bridge collapse has helped, move that agenda along by raising fears about some of these older bridges along that route. We need to build new bridges along that route that would be running between Canada and Mexico through Minneapolis down to, I guess, New Orleans. Is that where it's going to go?
No, we would be going west of that. It would use I-35 coming out of
Austin. Yeah, go through Austin.
And it goes down even to Laredo, I believe. But that does bear watching, because is this the way they do things? And remember something too, not to get too far afield of the situation, but what should be forgotten, because I do believe he was onto something, and that was when we had a guest on that was a architectural photographer, and said he was privy to discussions that the trade towers were weakening because of what obviously the flux, the winds, and all that other stuff, and that that they might have to be dismantled, or else they could pose a problem as time would go on, as bolts snapped and such, and you had a fulcrum going on down how many floors because of the wind that they took across all these years. Well, that's legit, and they had to do something about it. The idea was the Rockefellers didn't necessarily want to deconstruct it and go through all that crap. So if something had to happen, why not use them? And that sounds wild. It doesn't sound so wild when you hear Tom talk about it. But here's another situation where, by all means, you could have certain infrastructure conveniently blown to make way for something else. But let me run this by you, too. This is also speculation, but I think it's interesting to note. We know that the infrastructure in the United States is crumbling. We know that bridges in the interstate systems obviously are hurting. They could all use a revamp. What I also find interesting is that there is still a universal National Service Act on the Hill. It's obviously still just a resolution which calls for compulsory national service for 2 years. It's been modified 2 times since its original appearance in 2003. It calls also for those from 18 to 42 to be involved, and that's like, what, 42? Now, there's a military component in that, but where I'm going with this also is what I'm envisioning is in time to come, they can let all this stuff go, to the rats, and then what happens is you'll come out when we have a financial problem and probably a new world war. We'll come out with a new WPA, a new CCC, and we'll also be out there repairing everything that needs to be done. I've not spoken to you about this. I'm just throwing it out there. Does that make any sense to you whatsoever?
Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're heading back to 1935.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I see in this. And I look at AmeriCorps website, what is it, AMERICORPS I don't know, it's probably got a gov on the end of it, which is like, just for volunteering. It's a clearinghouse of volunteering. But you're going to be volunteered whether you like it or not. And that's what I see happening is that, when it finally hits the fan, this old bohemian will be out there sweeping streets or doing something. But that's what I see happening is that we're going to go into really a completely national socialist state where everybody has to do something for the fodder land. And that's what I look at this. I mean, so when they talk about the crumbling infrastructure, I'm saying, they're going to probably let it go quite a way before, they send us out there to take care of business. If you want, I don't know where you want to go, but if you want to address a certain topic, by all means. Otherwise, I'm going to change gears a little bit. But Andy, go ahead, chime in if you will.
Oh well, I've got a couple of notes, and a lot of different things happened this month that we were putting off our visit, to sort of see what happened.
Well, let me do this too. Since we've at least found a little bit of a thematic note at the beginning, which is what's taking place tomorrow and the whole of what's happening in the United States and bound to. I just want to tell people, too, you can call in on 888-333-9009. Don't be shy. I know you're out there. Everybody likes to IM. You guys are all like, and women are out there like, I don't want to call. But I know you're out there, so give us a ring. Also, by now you are IMing me on MSN at Vyzygoth. You can also send emails to Vyzygoth@verizon.net and Vyzygoth@hotmail.com. But again, if you get a chance, I really like to talk to you, because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this live thing, was because I've always been so hamstrung from being able to talk to folks. So, but be that as it may, we got a little comment here I want to run by you, Andy, okay? It says, why is the government privatizing the road infrastructure, claiming there's no money in parentheses, when the federal government is now reaping the largest gas tax revenues in the country's history? Interesting, no one is making any mention of this. I'll throw that over to you if you want to comment to that at all.
Well, I know there's an equation that one can think of whenever one is trying to figure out our system, which is public subsidy for private profit. Whenever a project whenever a service or project is going to make money, it's privatized. Whenever it's going to lose money, it's put back into the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
As a rule. So,
but do you see a trend right now? What's happening, and that is more and more states are talking about bankruptcy. And I mean, New Jersey is one that is moaning and groaning, and they don't know what to do, and they can't raise property taxes. That's another thing that's happening everywhere. Nobody can drain any more out of property taxes. So now they're going to privatize, as this listener was writing, to gain more funds. And yet, who it's being privatized by is really questionable, because they're not U.S. companies. And the greatest example of this is the Spanish company that has taken over the section of I-80 in Indiana, which has always been a toll road, but now it's their toll road. In Florida, I mean, I know they're not far away from doing this. I don't know when they're going to finally, break it to the people who are up in arms anyway. But this whole thing about letting governments, supposedly governments going bankrupt, not enough revenues, let's bring private companies in to help us. They'll grab the water, they'll grab the energy, electricity, natural gas and such. And then all of a sudden, I mean, what you're really seeing is basically, I mean, I'm sorry, call whatever you want. It's a communist system. There's no competition.
Yeah, and it's structural adjustment, just like the economic hitman wrote about in his book. I mean, they're doing the same thing here. You sell off the public resources of a country to private companies from elsewhere, and because it's profitable, so.
Well, and this is where the corporations finally this is where you finally find the last face of the corporations. The individual also IM'd and said, did you see that Turkey is considering privatizing the county's lakes and rivers? Well, this whole water issue is going to be the worst and the last one they go for. And that is, guess what, folks? There's just not enough water. And then you see all these companies. And I don't know if it's made an impact out by you, but you might have heard of Severhill Spring Water. That's been gobbled up a couple of times and now is under Nestle. And what they're doing, I mean, if this isn't monopolization, which seems to be okay, on a global level, which shouldn't have been okay on a national level, and yet it did happen, and the robber barons got what they wanted done because, it goes back to John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil and all that. They never lose. But this time it's so blatant in your face, you have no one else to go to for it.
Yeah. Do you want me to start rambling here?
Well, actually, I want to. What I wanted to do was, if you were okay with this, for some of the information that you sent me and I got in. I don't know if you want to speak to this or not, but I thought what you sent me and what's out there to be read, and that is that article by Herb Meyer.
Yeah.
Can we touch upon that?
Sure.
Now, you sent it to me. Now, having read it yourself, I had a certain take on it when I saw it. What was your take on it? Did you find it a warning? Did you, how did it hit you?
Let me call it up here again.
Yeah, no problem. Well, what in the world is going on?
I certainly noticed that ending where out of nowhere he says that the culture war is the whole ball game. And
phraseology. Yeah.
Judeo-Christian culture we have to somehow preserve Judeo-Christian culture. It sounds like something a closet Jesuit might say.
Well, what I think this war is going to be, the coming war will be, what will be identified as its origin will be religion. And that's what I think he said here. And that is, he spoke about, Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And all I saw him do, I think, while he might have been trying to give out information and perhaps give out a little warning cry about what's taking place, I thought couched very much in his rhetoric was kind of promoting the fact that we're going to get into a war based on religion, and we've got two enemies to be on the lookout for, at least, he couldn't say it in Davos necessarily, but bad old China and bad old Islam. I thought he promoted definitely some kind of, racial/religious/ethnic agenda. And I thought that was quite blatant. I don't know how you feel about it, but what's your take on it?
Well, yeah, I think he's right that is the basis of, it's the old East-West battle between,
mm-hmm.
the Christians and the Muslims, and it's such a complex subject.
Well,
but yeah, it is, and I think people get constantly confused when they think of China, because they think of China as a separate country that is against us, and it's hard to. You got to remember that they're under some control of American corporatists, like the Rockefellers for a long time. So if they go rampaging around the East, who's really doing that rampaging? Is it them or is it us? And so the question becomes, what are the internal politics of China? What are are there nationalistic players in China that are going to go along with the Rockefellers and all the business connections that we have with them, and then at some point pull out and switch gears and really work against us? It all gets very difficult to predict. But there's definitely, they are us and we are them, in at least in a business sense.
Cuckoo, could you? He gave us some bad news, which isn't necessarily incorrect news. I do think he stoked the flames for a culture war, and it's I'm forgetting now who wrote something on that to a great extent. Huntington. Ooh. Anyway, but it kind of also, gets everybody pretty much in flow that this war is inevitable. This is the sides that it's going to take, and it almost goes back, to a 12th century crusade. It's the good guys in the West versus the bad guys in the East. And I want to throw something out to you. And I just want to mention this to everyone, that there was a book written called Lord of the World, 1907, published in 1908, by Robert U. Benson. Now, I'll tell you, you can go ahead and you can download this from the website. I'm not sure where I got mine, my PDF, and I'm not going to call it up right now. But I do have the PDF of it that came from the website, so people can go try to find it, or you can email me and I'll send you the PDF. But in Lord of the World, written again in 1907, this Catholic convert who became a priest, whose brother was a Jesuit, was talking about the way things would be in the 21st century, and he envisioned, much like Orwell did later on, which makes you wonder where Orwell might have gotten that thought from, and that there would be three powers. The Eastern Empire, which would be basically China and Japan, which had already reigned hegemony over the Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and I guess you could also throw in there Russia to the west, rather to the east of the Urals. Then there was Europe, as we know it, going up to the Urals, and then there was America, and also Europe went down into Africa as well. So you're dealing with the old Oceania, East Asia, Asia paradigm that Orwell wrote about in 48. But now he writes about this in 1907, and it's just so very interesting to me that he would break it down like that, because, again, this also goes along with what Sir Halford Mackinder had written about in 1904. And, of course, Mackinder probably was known to Benson and vice versa, and that it would be all about Eurasia in the next century, and it would be a fight for the last empire and the jewel that was Eurasia, or what Mackinder called the landmass between, well, he would call it the world island, the landmass between Lisbon and Vladivostok. Andy, I mean, to me, this build-up by our troops, for whatever pretense, is happening because the military is aware of this. It must be somewhat of a mindset or a psychology, and they want to be there to fight for the last empire. But the problem is, you're on their, as Brzezinski would say, chessboard, as Mackinder would say, on the heartland. And I think this is heavily brinksmanship, but I don't think it's about the oil. I think it's about empire. And that's the pretense we're using. And so when I see an article like this by Meyer, I see it just reinforcing that we're going to have the showdown on the chessboard. And honestly, it's not going to go well for us. So I know it's a mouthful, but that's these are the things that I see resonating as we're looking toward what I believe, and I'm going to ask you, is an inescapable final conflagration. How do you feel?
According to this vision from 1967, that I didn't get this message myself, but Tommy was certainly saying this is World War III. I don't know if that's the final conflagration, but it's a move to usurp that area and make it make it an industrial area. I think they want to build factories there and more petrochemicals and more everything in the Middle East.
Well, if they succeed in depopulating as they want one way or the other, and since, as Mackinder said, and as you can well understand, anybody could, I mean, no matter what we think about, the vast expanses of Russia or in China, I mean, they still have resources that have gone largely untapped. There's plenty of stuff to go all around. So the double whammy is, there'll be more resources than ever and a whole lot less people to have, that'll tap into them, which is going to be, would make things, very, very acceptable to the global elites. And that's what I think they want. Nobody really wants to think about life in these terms. But let me just ask you this, too. I mean, with what you've seen has happened with personal finances, given the fact of the rise in oil prices translating to gas, and that you pay that across the board also with all goods that you buy in stores that are transported by such fuel, vehicles that use such fuel. And now all of a sudden you're starting to get all these tremors about shortages of food. This is turning out to be a very rapid acceleration of events in only, 4 months of the year 2008. Now, you might accuse me of being gloom and doom, but I think this is pretty much where they were headed, and they finally cut, at least one horseman loose. I know you have I guess you have probably a more hopeful view of things, and obviously for a lot of reasons. One of them is that you have a child. But I mean, what's your take on what's going on? Do you think this is just going to be a cycle that'll go up and come back, and and we'll be okay again, or do you think we've really, are on the threshold of a time untold?
Well, they know in the industrialized countries that the populations are aging, and that they're not going to support. There's not going to be enough young people to support the old folks in here in our country and Russia and a lot of countries, and they're on the one hand taking advantage of that by milking as much excess cash that there might be out there before the structural adjustment has to come in.
Also, I want to mention we're with Andy Colvin. He is the author of The Mothman's Photographer. We had a caller who dropped, and I'm sorry about that. I was a little late on the trigger. If you want to call back in, by all means, we'll take you right away. Don't be dissuaded by that. So do so. With regard to the Meyer piece and where we're going in this whole geopolitical game, all of it I think is interesting because it's a triggering mechanism that Brzezinski identified in his book, The Grand Chessboard, and that was if you go into Iran, ... And he said, he stated in that book on at least 2 occasions that if the United States were to, encroach upon Iran, it would agitate an axis that would consist of China, Iran, and Russia. In Benson's piece, he says that Russia has failed, they've fallen, and it's all about the Chinese and Japanese having amalgamated, and it's only a matter of time if they want to go westward. So I just think there's too many arrows pointing to this direction, and I just wonder if we're seeing something that is going to be,
Well, again, it would depend on who's running the show in China, Russia, and Japan. Who is, because it could all be a big fakery in the sense that, we're going to have wars, we're going to have a big war, but is it going to be totally manufactured in the same people are supplying all sides, controlling the movements of China, the Rockefellers, they're going to be on both sides, probably.
That was...
Or a Rockefellerian combine.
Right. To me, that's always been the big question. I mean, Harry and I went back about this, time and time again, not in a adversarial way, but wondering, and as best we could figure, China was in tow to the bankers too. I mean, Rockefeller had set up in that country, in the 20s and 30s with his oil combine. And so even though they seem to be different, that they might be a rogue, if they're in tow, they'll play their part also. The one thing I wondered about is if somehow, some way, China might have thought or might think that they could bust a move and shirk everybody and run the table. That's what I'm wondering about, whether they would, in a sense, because, Asians, in a sense, have always been a bit separate from the rest of the world. In their thinking and such, and it doesn't make it good or bad, it just makes it different. But I'm just wondering if they're thinking about, we can do this, so we'll just play along for a certain point, and then we're going to go ahead and write our own script. I'll just ask you your feelings on that, and you might have a little bit more insight to that than other people do.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm married. I'm married into sort of a Chinese family, and I hear things about, my wife's opinion is that there would be players in China that would try to bust a move, and I'm sure there would be. Let's face it. There's people always trying to vie for power, but how, will they succeed or not? It's so complicated.
Oh, no. I know.
The media, who's setting up the media over there? Why? Well, the Bushes control the satellites over the media in China. That's what I've heard, that they, whatever satellites have been deployed there, the Bushes were involved in that, in the financing of and so forth. So one would imagine that the media could be controlled to the point where a rogue or, nationalistic movement could be controlled.
Also, what I've wondered about, and that's because of a book I've been talking about a little bit more lately after having read it last year and talking about it then, and that is that book called The Meneses Chronicles, or Man-Isis, that comes out of the Rosicrucian facility at Quakerstown, Pennsylvania, in which they foretell the United States being invaded by what they call the Old World, but then the war and the invasion gets abrogated by a tumultuous event where there's great geological upheavals in all around the world, and everybody's like, whoa, I don't even know my country's there, so they all just decide not to fight anymore. I think that possibly could happen, and I also think that something might get out of control. I look at the Revelation breakdown of not the end times necessarily, because the world will go on 1,000 years if you believe in what Scripture says after Christ comes back. But I think what we're looking at is a period of tribulation, and I don't know if you can avoid that no matter how you cut it. So I just think things are getting extremely interesting, and is it possible that we are looking at something that is really probably pretty unpleasant? But, if it's going to happen in our time, that's the way it goes. It is a little bit fatalistic, I understand, but it doesn't make me wrong. Do you want to respond to that at all?
Well, I definitely think the middle class is going to face hardships here in America, but there's always suffering going on. Our system is set up so that a certain amount of the population is living in comfort, while our armies are going around the world causing misery in other places, that ends up supporting our comfort in the form of cheaper products and investments and so forth. So that's always going on. And when I was a Buddhist priest for a short time, that was kind of my thing, was trying to get it through some of these Buddhist heads that this is what's going on. They're very naive, a lot of the Buddhists. A lot of them are very comfortable. They make a lot of money. They've never really thought too much about poverty and how it fits in. They think it's all happening out there somewhere else, and it doesn't have any connection to what's going on here. And it's exactly the opposite. Everything that we have is built on the misery that we've taken to other countries and the way we've exploited their resources.
Yeah,
once you remember, and people are like, "What do you do about it?" And I go, "You don't have to do anything. You just have to realize it. Mm-hmm. It will inform your actions for the rest of your life."
Well, something's going to happen. They're not going to be pretty, but what's going to happen is, as Orwell also laid out in his treatise on patriotism and nationalism, and that is, much like it happened in Germany, people will be becoming more myopic and not understanding why so many people hate us, because they're thinking, well, we're just good guys and we're so successful, and they just hate us for our success. And in essence, it's like, no, we hate you because you get your fat ass in our country and we don't want you there. And I think that's another thing that's overlooked, is the fact that no matter how many troops are deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, how many more are in other places, and interestingly so, in the area that Mackinder identified as the heartland, the pivot point, the buffer between China. And you know what? In a sense, we could be looking at something akin to the Mongol hordes charging westward against, Byzantine Europe or whatever. Things are getting, whatever is old is new again. So, Andy, one of the other things if I could jump to, and that is if you want to speak to it at all, which goes back to really the core of all the shows that we've done. I just want to let everybody know, too, if you want to call in, jump in, no problem about it. It's kind of free flow here. It's 888-333-9009. I don't think that's a Masonic code. You might find something there. I don't think so. It's 888-333-9009. Talking about the email that was sent to me and that I sent along to you. I don't know if you had that before you. I could read it if you want me to. But going back to the shows that he heard you do, and also Harriet, got him thinking. Do you want me to read it aloud? Would that be helpful?
Oh, no. No, you don't have to. I just remember he said that he thought there was a connection between the New Greenbrier in West Virginia and the Shepherdstown.
Well, and the thing is, he put it in parentheses, I believe, the New Greenbrier. What's up with that? I mean...
Well, I know someone who lives there in the New Greenbrier. If I'm right, if I'm correct, that's the new... the $1 million homes that they've built. It's a gated community that they built around the Greenbrier, where the hotel where they used to take the presidents in times of national emergency, and they have the underground, city and all that.
Mm-hmm. Now, is the New Greenbrier, because, I'm always thinking Greenbrier, and I probably got this wrong. I'm thinking down in Virginia. This obviously is West Virginia.
It's right across it's very close to Virginia.
Okay. Yeah. But is this got anything to do, that must necessarily mean also, if I got my memory of West Virginia's layout right, that it's in proximity to a certain degree to Shepherdstown?
Well, Shepherdstown, geez, seems like it's up north with some of these small colleges where they do train the NSA guys to do their,
mm-hmm.
eavesdropping and stuff. All he said was that one town is connected to another, so I'm not really sure what.
Well, he said he'd have a lot to say about it later.
Okay.
He said, but all I can get into right now is that I believe that the, quote, New Greenbrier could be tied into the Clarion Inn in Shepherdstown, because more later as I formulate my thoughts. So in all fairness to him, he's just throwing that out. And it was meant to be a bit of a skeleton, and indeed it is. But I just want to throw that out to you because, again, with the shows from yourself and also Harriet that go out there, as more people fall upon it, and accountants that for the first time, they chime in on it. We got a little comment here that said I had planned to go to Greenbrier last year, and it never panned out because they were doing refurbishment, and it was still closed to the public. It is open now. All right, thanks to Dave for that. All right, now at this point, I just want to also say that I had attributed to Dave what, in fact, Wayne from Austin had sent me. I can't remember what that was. It was probably, I know what it was. I had spoken to the video that's up on YouTube with regard to the Kennedy assassination called, what is it saying? Something about revision of history or something like that. I don't know. Evidence of revision, but it's strictly with the Kennedy assassination. And it's great stuff because the first segment of it, an hour and 40 minutes long, is just complete old black and white footage of all the networks and the stuff you will never hear again. I'll leave it at that. So it's actually Wayne that sent it to me, not Dave. But anyway. All right, it's rambling time. If you want to hit upon something, we've only got about 14 minutes left. But if you want to hit something that has taken place between the last time you were on, why don't we go and whack that?
Okay. One thing that happened last weekend was just another little synchronicity involving the number 911. I mentioned my Buddhist teacher before, Aryadaka. He and I used to walk a lot in Seward Park in Seattle, which is this island that the Indians held sacred. And he always talked about, that there was a council spot there somewhere hidden in the woods. And he never took me there. I'm not sure if he even knew where it was, but I imagine he did, but for whatever reason. And there's another guy that I interviewed in the series, Ken Alton, a Filipino shaman who goes there and does this. He knows where it is too, but he wouldn't, show me where it was. He took me to another place nearby, and I always wondered what was going on with that. And but I found it last weekend on my own. And I think that's the idea, is that you have to find it on your own.
Okay.
It's like, it's a powerful spot. So if you're not ready for it and somebody takes you there, it might negatively affect you. That's what I'm guessing. So I found it, and what was I going to say? When I was there, I had this certain feeling. You know, I get this feeling before synchronicities happen, and like a universal clarity thing. I can feel all the energy of the universe, you know, sort of going through me, and my sense of my body expands out to meet the universe is the best way I can describe it. You start to it's a practice. It's a Buddhist practice of imagining that everything is happening inside you instead of everything happening out there. And so that feeling was very strong when I just arrived at the park. So I knew something was going to happen. And then I rounded this corner, and something said, okay, you need to go off into this area that you've never been to. And there was no trail. And I arrived at this cliff, which overlooks this bay. And the bay is the most gentle part of the whole lake. Lake Washington is very large. But it's the only place in Lake Washington where you can actually moor for the night and anchor your boats. And so this would have been the place where Indians would have come to, you know, park their boats and have council meetings with other tribes and stuff. And this spot would have been overlooking that. And the telltale trees were there, the madrona trees, ringing at the site. And as I was there, I found out later that a person, right as I was standing there, another person in the city agreed to an intermediary for me to pay me some money. That someone owed me a couple $1,000s. They decided they were going to pay me $911 at that exact moment. And I don't know, it was just one of those little things. And this was a really traumatic relationship problem. I mean, it caused a lot of problems in my life, this misunderstanding with this person. So it was a big deal because it's been going on for weeks. And then I found out that at this place there's a tradition of there being a supernatural monster called the Yahoo. And it only matters simply because my research these days has been focused on Yahoo media. I mean, it's just, you know, when I do my media research, it's all based on Yahoo News. It's just a name thing. Interesting little name thing. Other little name thing is Beck. In China, the Bigfoot is called Bekbok. And in the Northwest Indian culture, it's called Bakwas. So Bak is in both names. So you have another connection between Northwest and Asia in terms of what these monsters are called. Another name thing is Moth and Mother. I've talked about how the hoax name for Mothman should not be called Mothman, but even though it is, there's all these other connections going along with it, like Mot, the female winged deity from Egypt. But the very name Mother, you know, is related to Moth, and probably comes from that deity. But there's the connection to Mary too, because Mother Mary, and then you see Mary visions at the same places that you see the Mothman visions. You know, these creatures, these different entities are seen at the same spots. And in fact, one of my witnesses had another sighting in the last month. Sharon Moore, who I've talked about before, she saw a wire entity that looked like nothing but a wire. Now, this could give rise to some of the serpent legends. You know, people seeing this wire figure might interpret it as a serpent. But there's a whole lore about strings falling from the sky. We had a Mothman witness. Actually, she's not a Mothman witness. She's a lady that was involved in the Mothman list and has sort of dropped out of sight. But she saw a string fall from the sky in Youngstown, Ohio, not too long ago. But if you go back into the ancient stories, Keel found a lot of these stories involving things falling from the sky that had, you know, some were ropes that had anchors on them. And a lot of times it would fall on churches, or churches would be built where these things had fallen. And the same day that I talked to Sharon about her sighting, I watched an old Johnny Quest cartoon. And it was a Haji. There's a whole thing in Middle Eastern lore about these strings. These, not only can you charm a snake, but you can charm a string, a rope. And there's the Indian rope trick, which involves a rope supposedly falling from the sky. And Keel thought that they were. He found that some of those were fake. They had a horizontal line that they were running across the valley, and then they would drop a string down from it. And then a boy would climb up the string and disappear into the night sky. But the string is thought to come from magic carpets. Magic carpet, is another UFO kind of thing that you find in Middle Eastern lore. So there's a connection between all of these sort of magic things and ropes and serpents and.
All right, I'll tell you what. We got a comment, or a question rather, and I got a comment. That bit about the streamers coming down from the sky.
Huh?
I don't know if you remember this. I don't know how many people remember this, but there was a show that was really well done back in the old days, in the late 50s, early 60s, called One Step Beyond. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and they did some stuff that was factual. I mean, that I found later on. They did stuff on Lincoln and his premonitions and such, but one of them was a show with these streamers coming down. And when you mention that, I think back to that show because they gave you a date, they gave you a place where it happened. I would say they were very much less sensational, if at all, than other shows that would come by later. And so when you mention that, I don't know if you remember the episode. I don't even know that show exists anywhere. Boy, I wish they would grab that and put it back on TV. When I put it back, but bring it on TV Land or something. But anyway, be that as it may, the streamers coming down, that's a resonant story, in other venues. Here we go. I don't know if you know anything about this, but the listener wants to know, do you have any opinion on Lloyd Pye and his presentations?
Who's that? Lloyd Pye?
Yeah, P-Y-E.
No.
Okay, nothing on that?
Not familiar with it.
Okay. We'll hear about it.
Speaking of premonitions, though...
and also Jim said, tell him to read the story about Captain Jack in a red robe.
Okay.
All right.
I don't know that one either.
All right, there you go. You're over 2. No problem. No pressure on you, though. All right, okay.
I can tell you that at Fatima they had some streamers, this 1917 sightings, which were occurring monthly at the same time on the same day. Streamers were seen one time, or maybe more than that, and the lady, the main child witness, Lucia, had a premonition of the Pope being having an attempt made on his life, which supposedly then was the one where he was stabbed by Acha. I can never pronounce his name right. Ache. So you have, there were Mothman witnesses that had Pope premonitions. So you have the same thing happening in Fatima and in Mothman stories.
Well, Chica Bruce came on and said that those sightings were basically of UFOs, and as you might guess, a Jesuit grabbed hold of it and said, "Oh, no, those are mother images you saw," and the rest is history.
Well, what a lot of people don't know is that there was also Mothman was seen at Fatima, and I can read it to you from page 204 of Keel's book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, where he says that our next wingman was a headless angel, 4 young shepherdesses playing along a ridge near Calbeco, Portugal, in the summer of 1950. Because these things started in 1915, and then they lasted a couple of years. They reportedly saw a figure like a statue made of snow, which the rays of the sun had turned somewhat transparent, hovering in the air. One of the girls, Lucia, later became a central figure in the events at Fatima. So we have that, and then he has some other interesting Mothman sightings. One from 1922, where a guy. Does this one involve a rope? Well, it involved he said that this creature was quoting biblical texts. So you have Mothman quoting biblical texts to a guy. Then we have another one that happened in Nebraska that same year that Gray Barker investigated. The guy's name was Lamb, L-A-M-B, his last name, which happens to be the same last name as Tommy's mother. And this guy saw a UFO that turned into a Mothman and landed. So that's way before, the typical Mothman era, what we think of. And then Keel says that there were also Birdman sightings happening in 1946, along with the ghost rockets, the Foo Fighters.
Right.
That the Birdmen were dropped from the media stories. They only wanted to focus on the Foo Fighters. So you see, manipulation of these Birdman sightings all the time because the church doesn't want it out.
Andy, listen, thanks for coming on again, and we'll get together in a while to, I guess, find out what's happened in between the times we've spoken.